And we're going to switch over and to a
Sonya.
discussion. Yay! So Sonya Coleman is the Digital Engagement and Social Media Coordinator for the Library of Virginia. Sonya's waving. We're going to stop sharing. Yeah, okay. And Library of Virginia has been doing crowdsourcing for over 5 years. Actually, Sonya can probably tell us longer. And they know a lot. So we have some questions for Sonya, but we encourage you, if you have questions for Sonya, to ask them as well. So
you will need to unmute yourself to ask, but yeah, please feel free to jump in anytime.
Yeah. So Sonya, if you want to start out by telling us a little bit about yourself, your job, and your responsibilities.
Okay, I've had kind of a weird path into libraries, maybe not a traditional path. My undergraduate degree is in art history and psychology, which neither of which is very practical, but why not? So then I worked in an art gallery for a couple of years, and deciding that sales was not really what I wanted to do. I decided to leave that job, but in the meantime, I had taught myself to use Photoshop to create all of our advertisements, and I had learned to use databases when I was keeping an inventory of those artworks. So I really did learn a lot. Had a brief stint as a graphic designer before landing a job in a photo digitization project in a medical library. From there, I worked on several different projects, doing reference and tours, photographic artifacts, creating physical and digital exhibits, and finally managing the migration of a large digital collection. So it was really a crash course in libraries and special collections. I was so lucky to work there and just sort of stumble in to this job. I moved and essentially sort of started over in Richmond, Virginia, and again was lucky to land at the Library of Virginia's IT department in our sort of little digital collections unit. I did everything from updating links and files in the catalog, sort of that grunt work that has to be done, to managing our social media and sort of pushing the library further in that direction, and finally planning and implementing our crowdsourcing projects with our team in IT and others throughout the library. Now that I've decided to stay in libraries after more than a decade, why not stay? I'm finally getting my MLIS, and I hope to finish this year. So that's me.
I remember, Sonya, in a presentation you did at SAA, you mentioned that you've done some political organizing too. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been pretty politically active since I was a teen. I was definitely like that annoying girl in school trying to sign a million petitions for all the things that we were going to save and do. So I got used to building networks very, very early on, and was usually running clubs and campaigns and things of that nature. So it came pretty second nature to me to start doing that here as well. I also do a lot of fundraising for these different causes. So I think that draws on a lot of the same skills that are needed to be a crowdsourcerer, which is definitely going on my next business card.
Yeah, that was a new word for us that some of the people at the Library of Congress started using. I thought it was a very clever name for people who do crowdsourcing. It's interesting because I think the political organizing, we've also seen people who are great at crowdsourcing who come from like an athletic coaching background. So the psychology piece is interesting, yes, right?
Absolutely. Because outreach and success and building people's confidence as they do these tasks that are unfamiliar to them, but which they can be really successful at, right? That's really cool.
So can you tell us, maybe give us a history of Library of Virginia's crowdsourcing projects?
Well, it's a long history, longer than I even knew when I first started here. I was told about this project where they would actually mail microfilm to different public libraries, and people there would index these records and send them back.
Wow.
So there were some pre-internet crowdsourcing happening. But in my time, we started pretty simply just by posting images to Flickr and asking the public to identify individuals in those photographs. We also have a collection of historic newspapers called Virginia Chronicle. It's part of Chronicling America, that's hosted in Meridian. And users can correct the OCR to text there. So that is also a crowdsourcing project, but even though it has existed for a long time, since I started in 2011, it was already around. It was never promoted as a crowdsourcing project where volunteers could do things. They kind of didn't know how to start getting that word out. It was just promoted as a resource. So we have Virginia Chronicle. And then in 2013, we started really thinking about doing this document transcription. We saw several other places were experimenting with this. So we started doing our homework, and then in 2014 is when we launched Making History Transcribe. That was sort of our first dedicated crowdsourcing platform. So it's been going since 2014. It's built in Omeka with a Scripto plugin, which is one option. It does take some in-house developers to help you keep that going. Please be aware. And once we had transcribed some forms in that Omeka Scripto combo, they were part of the WPA Life History Collection. We realized how clunky that system was for doing these types of government forms, because the instructions are to transcribe all the text on the page. So volunteers end up rewriting these same fields for every form. And we eventually just posted a Google Doc that they could go grab that text from. But when we had done that, we started looking around again at what had changed. A lot had changed in the 4 and 5 years since our first sort of research into this area. And that's when we found From the Page. And you all offer a structured transcription where you can outline different fields and your user just fills them in. So that's it. So now we have those 3 crowdsourcing projects, Virginia Chronicle, Making History Transcribe, and From the Page. So that's where we are.
Great. Let's see. So you do some things kind of differently when it comes to recruiting volunteers for crowdsourcing. So tell us where all your volunteers come from. And, you know, we've seen the picture in the presentation, and I know that's just a small portion of the many volunteers you have. How many volunteers do you have on a monthly, weekly, annual basis, and where do you find them?
It's hard to judge exactly how many, because our stats through Google Analytics would just be page hits, and you could tell how long people stay, and it might be, 20, 30,000 browsers visited this website. But I think really we have a core group of users. Our registered users on Transcribe are around 600 to 700, and then I think we have about 200 people that actually sort of show up consistently online to help us with things. We are reaching a lot of those volunteers through in-person events, which you mentioned, and I have done those all around our state at public libraries, ranging down to Southwest Virginia, all the way to the coast. So in Richmond, though, we work with a great volunteer organization called Hands On Greater Richmond. They are a volunteer hub where all of these volunteer opportunities are listed for people to come browse. They register for the event, and we have a volunteer coordinator who sort of helps us get everybody to the right place at the right time. And then that's a great, person to have on your team, someone to help you do that. And through Hands On, we offer service hour verification, which can be very important. I think part of valuing our volunteers' time is to understand that they may also need something from us. A lot of high schools have a requirement that their students now volunteer a certain number of hours in order to graduate, or people may be fulfilling court-mandated volunteer service. I think we can help them and they can help us, and it's a good relationship. So people come to those, they may participate again from home, they refer family and friends, which is awesome. And then we also reach out to a lot of teachers and professors who can refer students for, again, that volunteer service or extra credit as needed.
Great, that's a lot of different kind of ways to engage volunteers.
So you've had years of experience on multiple platforms, and you've had hundreds of volunteers. What have the biggest challenges been for crowdsourcing at Library of Virginia?
well, we call it feeding the beast, because you have to, once you get these great volunteers, you then have to keep up with the demand for new documents, new items to transcribe. You don't want people to get bored, because then they're going to check out and just go do something else. So we have to try and keep up with that demand online. And it sort of puts your workflows into a different perspective when you start thinking about how you're moving these digital objects through this process and getting all your staff on board internally and getting the public to understand that process. I think that is one of the biggest challenges.
Okay,
Great.
that's kind of a good challenge to have, but I'm sure it's still a challenge.
Right. So what would you say your biggest triumphs with crowdsourcing have been?
I mean, I can give you the stats of what we have accomplished, which is, over 80,000 pages on Making History Transcribe. I think it's around 15 on From the Page, 15,000. And then over 1 million lines of text, OCR text corrected in Virginia Chronicle. So we've done a lot of actual work, but we always say that there is also a byproduct to that, which is these relationships that you're forming with your users. And you're really trying to convert them to be advocates for your institution. If you ever face any sort of budgetary crisis or something like that, they may be able to advocate for you. And really just that civic engagement aspect of making people feel ownership over these public records, I think is very important to me, where they know that this is their library and they can come here and use these things and feel a connection to Virginia's past. They really do engage on a very deep emotional level with these stories.
So I'm curious if you have or are able to share any stories about particular volunteers that you've worked with in those relationships. There's one that we've had in common, I know, but
when we started From the Page, we had a volunteer transcriber who was related to the material that we built From the Page around for the very first project. And it's been
10 or more years.
10 or more years. And now he does a lot of work for Sonya. So.
Yes, Nat is his name, and he does work with us quite a lot. He has helped us test new software and, try out new types of documents, see if they work. He really provides great feedback all the time. And he's one that's always looking for something interesting to do. He recently discovered that in Chrome, he could change the language setting and then start proofreading some of our documents that are in French. So that's what he's recently been doing for us.
Wow. So you'll find these volunteers are super engaged and will go so far beyond what you imagine. So I think we're going to ask you one more question and then open up for any questions from the audience. So, this webinar is your first crowdsourcing project. So do you have any advice to listeners on their first project?
I would say don't underestimate the time that you're going to need to form those relationships with users and with your coworkers and even with colleagues at other institutions. It is important that you form a community around your project and in order to help it become successful. So develop that group of super users, find your NAB footing, find whoever it is that's going to help you test these things and make sure they work, and just become their transcription BFF and just keep emailing them, keep in touch, and come up with ways to show your appreciation for your volunteers. So that's my advice.
Great, thank you.
Do we have any questions from anybody who's called in, who's listened to this or watched this? I think you can type things into the chat and you should be able to unmute yourself as well and just fire away. Oh, Joaquim from calling in from Lisbon has a question. Hi. Joaquim's from Portugal. Should we, I'm gonna make sure that you're unmuted, Joaquim, so you can ask questions.
Oh, Coleman.
Oh, sorry, not
Lisbon,
Lisbon.
sorry.
Okay, are you listening?
Yes,
Are
we
you
can hear
listening?
you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi. I'm from Portugal. I work in a herbarium. It is a major herbarium in Portugal, so it's a very different type of material you were talking. But there are a lot of projects in Europe for digitizing herbariums, and some of them are being transcribed by citizens. So they have crowdsourcing projects. I'm starting my own project in my institution now, uh, with a platform I'm developing for that purpose. And I'm wondering if this kind of contact that you have with users is, so it is personal, you write emails to them. What if the messages are kind of automatic when they reach a number of transcriptions, or when they haven't been submitting something for a long time to remember them, you want them to transcribe or something like that? What if these kind of messages are automatic and not personal? Do you think it will work?
Let's rephrase the question and make sure we understand it.
Okay.
So,
Let's imagine I have a volunteer that has transcribed some records,
Yep.
and then he stopped. I think I should encourage him to transcribe more, or what is the problem, or he doesn't have the time, or something like that, or he is missing something in our project. So I want to contact him. I can do it by writing an email to him personally, or I can have a system that detects when there is a long period without activity and contact a user with an automatic message. Do you think this will work?
and
Some input there. We did have a developer who worked here for a while that was experimenting with creating just that sort of alert system, so that every time new documents were uploaded to transcribe, users would receive an alert, or they would get a tweet that automatically was sent that said new records added. I ended up not liking the results of what he had done, and maybe that was just how he chose to develop it. I wanted to include additional materials like photographs and other things that made these social media posts seem more personal, more interesting, and it just depends on what sort of message I think you would get your system to send. I don't know if that helps answer.
so I feel like you can automate. I think it's very valuable to automate locating users who might need that kind of reminder, right? If you have a system that says, here are very active users who have not touched the tool for 4 weeks or something like that, being able to get that list is useful. But I think reaching out to those people personally is incredibly valuable, right? These kinds of relationships that you can have with users. There's a project working on papyrus fragments that has a very, very active user in the Netherlands, who they will warn this user because he works on the project 8 hours a day. They will warn him when they're going to do system maintenance, because they know otherwise he'll get frustrated. He'll try to use the tool anyway, even though there are warnings that say, oh, we're under maintenance, this may not work. And having that kind of personal connection, especially when maybe a user may have a health problem or something like that, is really valuable.
And we recommend newsletters because you're not so much putting someone on the spot, right? You have to think really hard about the psychology of your volunteer, and you don't want them to feel under pressure from you saying, why aren't you transcribing, right?
Yes.
But a newsletter that makes your project sound very successful and like something fun to participate in, and that other people are doing this, makes them, people want to be part of successful projects. So that's part of what you are trying to communicate.
And if you're running projects that have multiple different kind of domains, you may be surprised by which volunteers are interested in which material. So when Nat Wooding was working on a set of farming books and finished them, there was no more material for him on one of our projects. he wrote to us asking if we had any other projects. And the only other project was a natural history project. It was an ornithology field book record. And it turns out that he had spent most of his career analyzing ichthyology field books. And so he jumped into this ornithology field book project and started adding all these comments about, that domain, right? So that's...
Yeah, so you never know.
Right, yeah.
The last thing I wanted to say, Joaquim, is From the Page is actually an open source software platform. So if you wanted to see if it would meet your needs, you're welcome to download it and run it on your own servers. You sound very technical. Not everyone is. So we offer, it's available as open source for people to run on their own. And generally universities with larger IT shops do that.
Yeah. So we'd encourage you to send us email and contact us about this because...
Okay. I can look at it, but my kind of material is very different. And so we have fields for things. So the platforms I inspired to construct my own platform are Zooniverse, that is very known for different purposes.
Yep.
So there are some projects on herbarium data.
Right.
And there is also a French platform from the Natural History Museum of France that is called Les Herbonautes.
Right.
The Herbonauts. So I kind of inspired on those platforms because they are very specific for my type of material.
Right.
So, but I can take a look from the page because the kind of interaction with users is something that can be improved maybe. So yes.
Right.
I have actually another question is about exposing the data. I mean the data of the participants, because you showed in the slide that there were the emails of your participants. So I don't know if it is a good idea to in a chat room or something like that you have for your users, that everybody knows the personal contacts of everybody. I don't know if this is an issue.
That is, so the email list is only available to people running the project at the end. So Sonya sees the emails of her volunteers, but other volunteers do not.
And only if they haven't opted out.
Yes.
So when you sign up, you have a number of settings. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have another question via chat from Nicole. Staff time was mentioned. Sonya, how much staff time does it take to manage projects? I'll give a counterpoint when you're done, because I know your projects are bigger and take a lot of your time. And also, we'll do the second question after that one. Yeah.
They do take a lot of time to manage, and crowdsourcing is something that I feel like can expand or contract as much as you need to. This job that I have now as digital engagement and social media coordinator was sort of formed because of these projects and the ongoing need to support them. So I am now pretty dedicated to fostering that digital engagement for at least probably 70% of my time. I'm making accounts, I'm emailing people, I'm setting up speaking engagements in other places, I'm having volunteer groups here, all of those things. And also sort of trying to work the back end and make sure that new supply of fresh documents is coming in. So all of that takes a lot of my time. Do we want to answer that question first and then the second?
Yeah, I wanted to, so we do have smaller projects than the Library of Virginia, many of them that are not, do not have a full-time staff member dedicated to them. So like the Indianapolis Public Library will run projects, and they have a staff member who is in their digital services unit who owns them, but her engagement is making sure the project is uploaded and configured right, so it's a lot on the front end, and then half an hour a day or less of responding to questions and comments from people. And when she kicks it off, she has to make sure that she usually has some marketing people who help her get the information out, or she works with their volunteer coordinator for people who want to come in and work on site. But she's not spending nearly the time that Sonya is.
Yes.
So what I generally tell people is about half an hour a day, about half a day a month if you're going to do a newsletter. And then, it's going to take you a couple of days to get a project set up. just getting everything uploaded and
announced and launched
yeah,
and things.
transcription conventions and things, but
Right.
it does not have to, you can vary it. If you want it to be super successful, the more time you put in, probably the better, the faster your material would be transcribed is the biggest difference, is how fast everything goes.
Well, and there's no problem with experimenting and seeing, just putting things up and seeing what happens and then adjusting your time accordingly and just sort of entering it with that expectation that you will need to adjust as the needs change.
Right. So there's a second question here. Are volunteers also adding metadata along with the transcriptions?
Not in our project, no. We sort of enter these documents with some very basic metadata that may be expanded after transcription and before it goes into our digital collection, but they're not actually entering any of those fields for us. They're just creating that searchable text that we add as an item.
Yeah.
And this is something that's a little bit different between Library of Virginia's projects and some of the other ones that we've seen. So for example, Alabama Department of Archives and History was starting off with these World War I service cards that had metadata really only at the, I don't know, folder level, stack level. Mm-hmm. So they'd say, well, here are the cards for Coffee County, Alabama that start with the surname B. And after they ran their project, they pulled all of that out and re-indexed all of their cards. So each card has its own metadata record listing exactly who the service member was.
So we didn't do any screenshots, but we have field-based transcription. So you can put whatever fields you want transcribers to fill there. Generally, they match what is on a form, right? But it's not out of the question to have some fields that are meta fields.
Yeah.
And we would eventually like to do more tagging and things like that, that would have that user-generated content brought in other ways. I think that would always be sort of clearly delineated for us from the sort of staff-produced